there's not unanimity when it comes to what Gladys Berejiklian said today. She seems to have had a crack at you. She says, I don't buy what I heard last week, that if everybody's vaccinated, we can't open up. That's the biggest load of rubbish I've ever heard, is what the New South Wales Premier said today. What do you make of her remarks? Is she overreacting to what you said? What's going on there?
No, I don't take it that way at all. I think the point is, and my point last week and this week, is actually that we open up progressively. It's not to say that. I think reported by some as indicating we wouldn't. My point was you have to learn, as we've seen from New Zealand today, as the UK Chief Medical Officer Chris Whitty said in describing what had occurred in another country, in Chile, that we learn from the world's vaccination programs, and we want to see our nation open up progressively, safely, as quickly as possible, subject to that safety. And that has been my position, that remains my position, and that's our national position in partnership with the states.
Now, you spoke about the next stage from National Cabinet, where to in terms of expediting the rollout for those over 50s. Do you see it within days that the over 50s will go to their GPs and get their vaccination? Is it going to happen within days? Is that what you hope to see?
Look, I'll be very cautious on setting expectations and timeframes. It's a National Cabinet process. There are really two things here. There's the capacity for individual general practices at a time that National Cabinet would consider to bring on those between 50 and 70 years of age, where those practices have that capacity. Some may not, some may be fully subscribed. And then there's secondly the capacity to expand the existing state and territory clinics, which are currently open, which are currently available for the over 70s, to allow them to be there for the under 70s, and then they may open up new points of presence around the state or around the territory. So they're the three things that can occur. We'll allow National Cabinet to run its process. I'm meeting this afternoon, literally shortly after you and I finish, with some of the GP and medical leaders of Australia from the AMA, the Royal Australian College of GPs, from the Rural Doctors Association of Australia and others. And we're planning out that process where if there is a final decision of National Cabinet, but they've certainly lent into it as an in-principle position, to be able to bring forward vaccinations for the over 50s, then we're ready to do that at a time that everybody believes is appropriate. But it's bringing it forward from the middle of the year. The specific date, that's to be determined.
Now, finally, Tony Fauci has said on the radio earlier that inevitably in the early stages of a rollout there will be hiccups until it ramps up to scale. He's talking about the Australian experience, incidentally. Do you think some of the criticism has been unfair?
Look, I think we've got 1.7 million Australians who've been vaccinated. There have been really two challenges. One, there was 3 million or 3.1 million doses that was otherwise due to arrive in Australia from Europe, which we've not been able to access. We'll continue to fight for those, particularly for PNG. But two, the big change, which is a global change, and not just with AstraZeneca, but you've also seen the J&J vaccine in the US paused. Some were arguing last week we had to have J&J. The next day, it was paused. The big change is that there's been medical advice that Pfizer will now be the preferred vaccine for the under 50s, and AstraZeneca for the over 50s as being safe and effective. And when we have that medical advice, we have to adapt. That has had an impact on the program design, no question. But every day there are challenges, and every day through the pandemic we've adapted. So we just continue to deal with a global situation where there's 700,000 cases a day overseas and none here. 1.7 million by the end of today, vaccinations that will have been completed, and a vaccination program that, since we brought on the GPs, has increased sixfold in 4 weeks. So you're always improving, you're always updating, and that's how we've kept Australia safe. The point was made during our press conference earlier. What did I think of the fact that there would now be no limits on the number of people who could go into football subject to the capacity of the ground? The idea that on Anzac Day or on Anzac Eve for the Melbourne versus the Mighty Tigers match, there could be 100,000 people or as many as they can accommodate. What a symbol of Australia's success. And when we put all of this into perspective, Australia has achieved at a national level an outcome virtually very few other countries, very few others have achieved or could aspire to, and we remain the envy of the world. And with a rollout that is accelerating with 330,000 people last week, and then if we bring forward the over 50s subject to National Cabinet, then we'll continue to vaccinate the most vulnerable Australians at the earliest possible times and to protect their lives. That's a pretty good outcome for a pretty good country.
Yeah, well, we keep our fingers crossed that everything stays on track. Minister, as always, I very much appreciate your time. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, Kieran.